Good. Um, the Muni Metro, as I mentioned, there is a study going on, and I thought it would be very useful for SaveMuni to get some of the background from people who have been involved for many years. And that's why I invited four experts, three of whom are with us. The fourth, Angelo Fagoni, uh, was unfortunately unable to come because as we are speaking, he is on a flight to New Zealand and has lost a day, and hopefully we'll pick it up sometime in the future. But Angelo expresses his regrets. He'd like to be with us. But we do have three other experts. I'd like to introduce them very briefly and then move into their presentations. Jerry Cawthon, who many of you know. Jerry has been a long-time consultant and engineer, and he was involved with the initiation of the Muni Metro, so he'll be talking about that. And then Rick Laubscher. Rick, who is the head of the Market Street Railway, has written a rather detailed history of the Muni Metro. And finally, Peter Strauss. Peter has been involved with planning for Muni systems for many years and is, I guess, now a consultant or has been a consultant for MTA. So I'm going to turn it over to them, and each of them has been asked to talk for about 5 minutes about some of their main impressions about how the Muni Metro is functioning and how it got to where it is at the present time. So here we go. I'll turn it over first to Peter Strauss. Peter, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Bob. First of all, I'm not a consultant currently to SFMTA. I'm not doing anything that anyone's paying me to do right now, but I did work for MTA for many years and was involved with Muni Metro startup in 1979-80 and was involved with the system throughout my career. There have been innumerable studies of how to operate Muni Metro. And these go back for 60 years, till from the origins of BART. And I like to describe it that there are two main threads of this debate that has gone back and forth. One is to lop off the lines in the subway and run a very simplified Market Street subway, maybe with one branch. And something like that is much, much simpler to operate. The other side of the debate, really is to continue to operate all 5 lines in the subway. And that's much more, much simpler for people to use because all of the lines go downtown. And that has gone back and forth for 60 years. In 1962, when the BART bonds were passed, it was projected that it was sold to people that all 5 streetcar lines would run into the subway. And in fact, it said that the Sunset riders are the ones who passed the BART bonds, Sunset streetcar riders, because BART failed in the 2 East Bay counties put together, and it was the San Francisco vote that pulled it over 60%. And that included a Market Street subway with all streetcar lines operating into it. But as soon as that was passed, SFPUC, which was running Muni at the time, started to have second thoughts. And in 1966, there was a bond measure that was put before the voters to build out the Muni subway, flesh that out. And PUC flipped and was not proposing at that point that all 5 lines run in, and instead that it be fitted out as a Twin Peaks rapid transit line, and that the outer end of the M and all of the other 4 branches would be converted to bus feeders. that bond measure failed. And the principal reason that it's failed, is believed to be that people were not not willing to accept that transfer. Again, this has gone back and forth and back and forth. And following the failure of that bond in 1966, there continued to be a lot of internal and public debate. And that went on and on and on until Joe Alioto was elected mayor. And Joe Alioto made the popular decision in favor of the riders, that the system would be built out with 5 lines and all 5 lines feeding into the subway. That's around the time that I went to work for Muni, and I was there in Muni planning for 35 years. And for the next 35 years, we honored that decision and found ways to solve some of the problems of Muni Metro and increase the subway capacity, but keep all 5 lines running into the subway. But after I left, SFMTA again reopened that issue and again proposed to lop off some of the lines. And in fact, they implemented that during the pandemic and sought at the end of the pandemic to keep the J Church out of the subway permanently. As you all know, that did not sit very well with J Church riders. There was a lot of protest again, for keeping the J Church along with the other lines running into the subway. And the SFMTA board relented, especially since subway ridership was down as much as it was, to restore the J to the subway. So all 5 lines, well, the L is under reconstruction, but the other lines are all running into the subway at this point. But that idea, just won't go away. I'd like to now take a step back and look at the system, look at the Muni system systemically. And this is sort of a sketch of how the Muni route system works. And basically, it's a radial grid pushed off to one side, that's built around a lot of strong radial lines to downtown and a bunch of circumferential or L-shaped in our case, and north-south crosstowns. And this systemic design has served the system very well. And I think it has a lot to do with the resiliency and the strength of the Muni system that we have today. I think, it factors into why the F line works as well as it does. It factors into why the 22 Fillmore, is now carrying more riders than it was carrying before the pandemic. It really, it serves riders really well. And it means that people can pretty well use 2 lines to get almost anywhere in the city, 1 radial line and 1 crosstown line. And again, that serves riders really, really well. Now, what happens if you break some of those lines is you really break the functioning of the grid. People, don't mind making 1 transfer especially when you change direction, but people really don't like to make a transfer when it's for a short line to continue in the same direction that we're going. That's the way people see it, but it really is just a breaking of this grid and how this whole system works if you start to turn portions of these radial lines into shuttles. I'd like to ask, is it going to be necessary to break some of these lines? What's really going to happen in terms of subway capacity? Now, no one has a perfect crystal ball, and no one even has a very good crystal ball at this point. But I don't think the case has been built. I don't believe that there is a case for needing to take lines out of the subway, to expand capacity in the next 20, 25, 30 years or further, as far as we can look out. The staff, as you'll hear at the next meeting, bases their projections on the housing element. But the housing element is a maximum forecast. And frankly, I think the likelihood that enough housing will be built in the next 20, 25 years to force lines out of the subway is somewhere between 0 and slim. I do believe, that downtown is going to, quote, recover. But I also think that what we've seen with remote work is a systemic change. It's really a change of paradigm of the work paradigm, in cities. And I think what we will see as downtown recovers is not going to be what we've seen in the past in terms of travel to downtown. It will be different. I think there are a number of strategies that are going to be put in place that will allow capacity to be expanded, and staff admits that. In the past, with the construction of the Muni Metro turnabout and the Muni Metro extension were strategies that, among other things, expanded the capacity of the subway by something like 50%. The staff is currently working on a new train control system, the TCUP project, the train control upgrade project, that by itself will increase the capacity of the subway from 30 to 42 trains per hour. That's almost a 50% increase right there. Between that and operating longer trains, and I would urge MTA to also operate longer cars, that will allow considerable expansion, greater than 50%, 50 to 70% expansion of the system alone. And that will carry us many years into the future from where we are right now. What happens, again, no one knows perfectly. What happens if those strategies are not adequate? Well, as I said, in terms of the grid, I think it's primarily important, that the continuity of the lines with service to downtown be continued. There are at least 3 strategies that have been put forward that I think, are worthy of additional consideration for what, for instance, could allow the J, which seems to come up most often, to maintain that capacity to downtown. One is the coupling strategy, that can't be done at West Portal. Jerry will, I'm sure, talk more about that. But there are strategies with coupling that could be implemented at St. Francis Circle that would allow some increase in capacity to be derived from that. Rick, I'm sure, Rick favors running PCC. PCC historic streetcars on the J, which would continue that radial capacity to downtown. And I'll let him talk about that, but that's another option that would maintain that connection to downtown. And the third one that no one's on this panel to discuss, but that I think is also worthy of consideration, that's been put forward, is the use of modern low floor streetcars on the J running down Market Street, which would provide, for instance, low level, fully accessible entry at all stops along the J, and then operate to downtown. So those are at least the point I'm trying to make is, there are additional strategies that can be looked at, that can be developed, and I'm sure there's some, I haven't mentioned and haven't thought of, that will allow us to increase capacity even beyond what the train control system and the running additional cars on the lines would allow us to do, to enable us to increase capacity in the subway and maintain downtown access on all 5 lines. And I will stop there and pass it to my fellow panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Can I ask one quick question of clarification? And this came up in the working group as well. When they're talking about 30 to change to 42 trains, is that one-way trains or is that two-way? Are we really talking about 21 trains 2 ways, or are we talking about 42 trains 2 ways?
Well, it's both. It's increasing capacity by that many trains inbound and increasing capacity by that many trains outbound. Something they don't go into, and it's where that number comes from, is capacity is not something that's spread over the whole length. Capacity is something that's constrained at individual points. I'm sure you know about this, in terms of descriptions of freeways. One of the arguments to not increase widen freeways is that, if you widen freeways, you may solve the capacity problem at one point, but it'll just pop up someplace else. Capacity is always constrained at particular choke points. What the new
Right. So that's 42 trains in at the portals and 42 trains out at the portals. That's what they're talking about.
Correct. And I haven't spoken
Okay.
to Dan Howard, but I expect that this will be achieved by increasing throughput at the portals, by increasing throughput at the DuBose, junction, and increasing the number of trains that can be processed through the Muni Metro turnback.
Okay, great. Next, I'd like to turn to Rick Laubscher. Rick, the floor is yours.
I actually think Jerry would be a better person to go second, because he was more involved with the birth of Muni Metro. I could add some historic context after that.
I could do that.
Okay, Jerry, you're up then, and then we'll go to Rick.
Okay, well, I'm going to try to keep it to 5 minutes, but I might overrun a bit like Peter did, but I'll try not to. I want to talk about the couplers and their function, but not right yet. There's a complicated way to look at it and a simple way to look at it. I'm just going to talk about the most obvious way that really sets it aside from not coupling. I started Muni in 1971. I stayed until 1983, so I was there about 13 years. And not long before I came, some things happened that Peter alluded to, but I want to add a little bit to that. Before I got there was a very big discussion involving all of the top level city officials about whether or not to go to coupling or to actually go to transfers. There were transfers looked at, of course, Jay and Los, and also at Yolo and West Portal. But the decision, and they actually sent an engineer, a guy I knew was one of the best engineers the city ever had, to Germany and Europe. He came back and said, build a 10-car train from City College to the downtown and couple the rest of them. You'll have a high capacity subway. Well, that did not fly because, as Peter said, people didn't want to transfer. And the city fathers decided after a lot of discussion that indeed they wouldn't force those transfers. So the coupling became the norm. Now that brings us to the Boeing Vertol, which is the first car that came here somewhere around. They started arriving in the late 70s, and they were up and running well before the Democratic Convention in 1984. I think 1982, the end line started to run. So the Boeing Vertol was a helicopter manufacturing company, if you can believe it. And somebody here, I'm innocent because I wasn't there yet, they decided that because they were building helicopters, building a rail car would be no problem at all for them. Now, no one in this country had built a rail car for about 35 years before then. So we were babes in the woods when it came to passenger rail transport innovation. But Boeing Vertol took it on, and they were, of course, faced with the need for these transfers because of what the city had decided. And Boeing had a lot of trouble. It was fraught with problems. They had the couplers were just one of many. The doors weren't working well. The suspension systems were not working well. The communication system was spotty. I'm sure there's many others that I'm not mentioning, but the fact is they gave a lot of trouble to the people who were, I wasn't on that job. I was on some other things, but not that. The poor guy who was trying to handle that for the MTA, Transit Improvement Program, which is what I was a member of also. He had to fight with Vertol and fight with his bosses at the Muni, my general manager who wanted quality, they didn't get it. And then the maintenance people took it over, and the Muni maintenance people never were able to make those couplings work. And I always heard two stories. One was, it's the Boeing Vertols. And the other was the Muni maintenance people didn't know enough to maintain the Boeing Vertols. I suspect it was a little of both, but the Vertols were definitely a problem. Now, it was so bad that the next generation of cars were brought in, which was a Bredas, didn't even have a coupling capacity. They decided they were going to do away with that coupling and not ever look at it again because of the problems. What we were always told was it was the couplers themselves that were the problem. You didn't hear much about how they were going to operate on the city streets. You really heard about the functionality, which I guess brings me to that. Well, one other thing before I get back to the couplers. Louis T. Clowder was a very well-known, respected transportation consultant. They did a lot of the maintenance and upgrading on the eastern part of the country, and they were well respected as a train designer. Even though the cars hadn't been built for a long time, we were bringing in European cars and cars from all over the place, Japanese. So Clowder was good. Clowder came in faced with a very difficult problem. He had 5 lines, as Peter said, feeding into one subway. That's rather unique. You don't find that. And incidentally, there are now 6 lines because somebody later on added a shuttle service from West Portal to downtown, which I don't think was one of the smartest things that they ever figured out. But they had to figure out how to get all those lines in with the coupling and then make the couplers work and keep the system running. The stations were designed for 4 and 5 car trains. I think now they couldn't get more than probably a 4. I know they couldn't get more than a 4 at the most now because the Muni over the years has taken advantage of the fact that there's been no couplings because, of course, as soon as you got rid of the coupling, you had to go to more trains, which meant they had to be shorter trains. So going from the original 4 and 5 to 3 and 4, and now it is 1 and 2, that vastly increased the number of trains in the subway to the ultimate of 43. Peter mentioned that. He thought the train control system could solve that. 43 trains, in my opinion, are not possible. You can't do that without having backups in the subway because of irregularities in the scheduling and things that you just can't always protect against. I think that there was a time in the afternoon exodus from the subway that there were stack-ups virtually every afternoon. I think the reasonable figure would be 25. Bart has been striving for 30. Has had a hard time to do it. This train control system I think it was estimated about at least 5 years ago it costing $350 million. It's probably double that by now. And I know it would be at least 2 decades before we see that go online. Those things don't happen fast. And when it finally comes about, would it really solve the problem without putting in some other ways of protecting that 5-zone system while at the same time protecting the veracity of the subway to do its job? I don't think so. So what we've suggested at Bathwick and other people have suggested is that now would be a good time where the ridership is down and the subway is not under such amount of strain as it was to do some testing of the couplers. And now I'm going to bring us back to the couplers for just a minute. There are hundreds of different types of customers manufactured all over the world. There are couplers everywhere. In every city, in every country in the world, you have coupling going on. Some at stations, some in yards. The Muni has couplers going on to yards all the time. BART couples all the time. This is nothing. It is not a problem. Now, there was a time when most of it was manually done, which is gawky. That means human error, and you've got a 3-minute delay or something goes wrong. And also it was not always safe for the people doing it. But this is 2023. This is not 1978 when the first trains came in. Everything can now be automated. It is automated. The couplers have 2 basic systems. One is a mechanical coupling, and one is the electronic coupling. Back in the Boeing day, they actually meshed at the same time. So if the mechanical couplers didn't succeed in perfectly aligning the car, the one car from the one behind it, then the electronic coupling didn't work and there's no communication between the car. You can imagine how difficult that was. Today's mechanical couplers are very stout, and at first the mechanical coupler locks in. It's kind of like a padlock. It locks in the heavy steel couplers and their parts, align the train so they're perfectly aligned mechanically or physically. And then as soon as that has been verified by a sensory device, the electronic couplers only then close after they know the alignment is perfect. So that alone is a huge improvement. And the one other thing is, if they wanted to set up a special signal block at each coupling point and have that automated, you could do that as well. You could, the signal block could automatically slow the trains down to whatever speed it would be appropriate, and then ease it in so that the coupling wouldn't, nobody make a mistake and go in too fast. And that would solve the problem, the other problem of potential risk to the riders if somebody's standing up and it gets hit too hard. So this is, to me, this is eminently doable. It is there. It can be done tomorrow. The problem that is not so easy to solve is getting the incoming trains on a schedule that's tight enough where you don't have to have one train sit there for 3 or 4 minutes waiting for the next one, or going on alone, which then defeats the purpose of the fewer trains in the subway. If you can get these to 3 and 4 car trains, you've got ample capacity in the subway for any foreseeable demand that might come up without necessarily any strain on the subway. It would have enough give and enough flexibility to handle it, but the coupling itself can be a problem. Now, I guess I'm probably out of time. There are ways of improving the in-pound line so that the services could be more regular, more predictable. The M line is very predictable, except for one place, and that's the St. Francis Circle interchange. I got to give you one other little bit of history that Peter didn't mention, and that is that the original plan was to extend the subways under West Portal Avenue and under the St. Francis Circle interchange and under the northbound lanes of 19 all the way into the median of 19th Avenue, which would then have carried it all the way to State College and on over to Balboa Park. That was blocked by the West Portal merchants led by a real estate broker who was on the board of supervisors by the name of John Barbagelata. And somewhat to the amazement of these business people along West Portal, they suddenly had a lot of friends downtown. They had found that PG&E was all for them. They agreed with them, and Southern Pacific and the Hyatt Regency and 2 or 3 other big businesses, the Chamber of Commerce, I think the Downtown Business Group, they were all for this. And I happened to be involved in negotiating the amount of money that would be saved by deleting that subway because the die was cast. It was dead. It was like $24.7 million saved by eliminating that vitally important piece of connection to the western part of the city. I guess you can guess by now where that money went. It went right down to helping to build the Embarcadero station. That's where it went immediately. And so that's how they built that. Embarcadero station was about partially half funded, I think, by this 24. Couldn't do that today, but in those days, the prices weren't that high. Let me see if I've left down. I'll give you 1 or 2 ideas about fixing it. If one place you could probably, I think, couple without too much trouble is just northeast of St. Francis Circle. The K line comes in and turns onto the same line as the M, and the M and the Ks could come through the circle, which is a problem, but you get them through, and then at the other side between the St. Francis Circle and 15th Avenue, there's plenty of room for trains to have, so you can have a stop there, and the trains could couple at that point. I don't particularly like the idea of coupling at the West Portal because you've got that L train coming in right at the point of where it goes in the hole. It's possible, but that isn't my favorite. Now, Angelo's got a really good plan of uncoupling the M lines at State College and sending 2-car trains on over to Balboa Park and then bringing them back in front of State College and coupling at the station, could be the existing station or maybe a new station a little bit to the south, and then bring in 4-car M-line trains instead of 2-car M-line trains. If you did that, that would be enough additional capacity on that line to get rid of those shuttles, which go from, like I said, they go from West Portal downtown and back, and that's just loading up the subway with unnecessary vehicles. The other one, I think there's a way to also couple the J to the ends without too much strain. I won't get into that unless there are questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jerry. Now, Rick, it's your turn.
I think Jerry beat Peter
Maybe not by much.
on the time elapsed. I'll try to keep it shorter than that. We should look at the history first and ask, what would we build today if we didn't have any of this stuff? Muni existed and built itself out, recognizing there was already a dominant streetcar company in San Francisco called United Railroads. And Muni was basically picking its initial routes to fill in gaps in service areas to where they were, United Railroads was already dominant. Geary Street took over a cable line. And that was, and still is, their best line, their busiest line. They needed a line into the Mission District for political reasons, and that was dominated by United Railroad. So they came up with this incredible corkscrewy, twisty route over the through Dolores Park and over the hill out Church Street, which dead ended at 30th Street. They bought trackage rights on Ocean Avenue to share with the 12 line of United Railroads, which went downtown all the way on Mission Street. The K went in the opposite direction, making a giant fishhook to reach the Twin Peaks Tunnel to get downtown, so you didn't have to go all the way down Mission Street. Well, now, of course, BART has replaced the old, that corridor with much faster service. The El Taraval was, again, a development notion and the M to open up the southwestern quadrant of the city to residential development. The M was so unpopular and so little used that it only ran for 14 years, and they shut it down and put buses on it. And it was only the rush of late World War II that brought the M back at all. And then the building of Park Brissett and Stonestown finally gave it a reason to exist. And now, of course, it's a vital line, and one that they started talking about making into a subway-like service. The N, again, to develop the western part of the northern part of the Sunset District, but in competition with the 7 line of then Market Street Railway, which ran right along Lincoln Way. And how did Muni manage to compete in these circumstances? With tunnels. Twin Peaks Tunnel, which was actually funded not by the city, but by property owners who self-assessed them so that they could get development, to make money out of it. And the Sunset Tunnel under Buena Vista Park. Both of those made the Muni's lines downtown faster than their competitors, and that's how they succeeded. All of that was based on the true, as Peter talked about, the true radial concept. You had a downtown where not only was the dominant office sector, but it was also the dominant shopping sector for anything but stuff you'd pick up at the corner market. And then the visionaries behind BART wanted real estate. They wanted San Francisco's downtown to boom. They saw San Francisco as a regional center, maybe a national center, with all these high-speed rail lines coming under the bay and straight down Market Street. It succeeded. We all know how downtown built up to the point where we have much more. Once work from home broke in, We have much more capacity now, office capacity, than we need. And as I think Peter says, nobody can really pull out the crystal ball and see how long it's going to take to fill those things back up. But we do know that it's highly unlikely to go back to a 5-day-a-week commuter work style. And that's going to change a whole lot of factors about what we do with our subway. So from my perspective, looking at the history, to talk about this coupling or that coupling or 3-car, 4-car trains, to me, misses a very basic point, which is what do we need now? What are we going to need when you see that a crosstown line like the 22 is running above capacity? And by the way, I think that's partly bogus. I think it's the extension on 16th Street to get rid of the little used Potrero Hill segment and connect to Chase Center and UCSF that's driven a big part of the rise in the 22 from pre-pandemic. So you can, all of these things that Peter and Jerry have talked about have been tried. And I have watched them all very closely as a news reporter and as chair of the Chamber's Transportation Committee and the Spur Transportation Committee. We've watched all of these things be tried by Muni, and regardless of, what the coupler problem is or the technical problem or the mechanical problems, you still have Muni people running it. And not to denigrate the Muni staff, but I've watched all the attempts to couple up, and really, they haven't worked. And perhaps this is a good time to try and test them again, as Jerry suggested, while things are down. But I think, you get the same result again, which is really upset riders waiting for 3 and 4 minutes because of all kinds of street conditions that still exist out there. And, taking it out on the MTA board, the MTA staff, their district supervisor. So, and this again is part of history. We've been through this whole thing. Also, when you talk to people at Muni, they've already decided what they want to do. And we could talk till we're red in the face. But Peter alluded, Bob alluded to the meeting. I'm on that committee because I applied for it, and I applied for it because I wanted to keep an eye on them. And, what they said at that kickoff or the last meeting was, just a bunch of slides about, well, we're going to consider this, we're going to consider that, consider all the other stuff. And the project manager there, I'm sorry, seemed to know nothing about the history of this. And when I pointed him to the article we had written online, he said, oh, well, I didn't know all this. So now he does, and I hope it informs some of the discussion. But the Muni people's belief, which is very deeply embedded, is that they cannot successfully run 5 lines in the subway. And we can tell them how to do it, but that doesn't mean they're going to learn how to do it or do it very well, because we have a history on that. And as travel patterns change, and as traffic, as radio riding to downtown is replaced by more crosstown trips and things like that, the question has to be asked, do we really need all 5 of those lines? When we talked to, one of the things that the project manager laid out was, well, we're going to evaluate which lines to take out of the, if we were to take one out, which one would we take out? Well, that's really not a very hard question. And, what I said, well, what, the N, the M, the L? Well, we're thinking about, we're going to evaluate all of them. Well, I think, frankly, that's a waste of taxpayers' money. Yeah. Nobody's taking the M Ocean View out of the subway after everything we've done. Nobody's taking the N Judah. My God, one of the reasons they don't want the J in the subway is because of the coupling problems and delays they encounter at DeVos Portal. And, they are maniacal about keeping the N on schedule to the greatest extent possible, because it's, I think, the busiest of the 5. And to them, the J, as was pointed out, which they were happy to turn into a shuttle, is last on their list, regardless of what they say. When the L is re-railed, finally, which another project taking forever, there is no way the new and very influential supervisor from that part of town is going to let Muni run the L as a shuttle or a shuttle with a K and force everybody to transfer at West Portal. Ain't going to happen politically. So where do we go from here? Well, we evaluate all these different options, yes, but let's not suck our thumbs for 2 years reviewing stuff we already know. I mean, there's data on all this stuff. There's ridership data. You can do origin destination studies, and you should, for the whole system. And then, you move forward. One of the reasons our nonprofit does support moving the J back to the surface is because the J is the shortest line of all 5 by a wide margin, even if you count the portion from 30th Street out to San Jose Avenue, which, by the way, was built for streetcar barn access and reduction of deadhead time, was never intended by Muni to be used for revenue service, and has very low ridership because it duplicates a whole lot of other service. But certainly the J from along Church Street and then on Market is a viable line and can be operated with either PCCs or low floor streetcars, modern streetcars, if they can negotiate the compound curves, which are very demanding through the right-of-way over Church Street, through between 22nd and 20th, and or you could operate LRVs pulled up if you increase the capacity of the overhead on Market Street, the overhead feeders, to accommodate the extra draw. So all of those things are possible. And I'll leave it at that, and we can go into discussion.
Good. Thank you, Rick. All right. Hands for people who'd like to comment or ask questions. All right. I see, well, let's see. I see Robin has a hand up. Mark, did you have your hand up? Yeah. Okay. I see Robin. I see Howard Stroessner. I see Mark. And I see Tom Rubin. So let's start with those 4. Go ahead, Robin. You're up first.
Okay. I want to ask a question about the coupling. I do remember it happening, and we might wait for the other train to come, and that delayed us. And then when I remember it came, whether it was outside the subway or inside the subway, it bumped. And I remember people standing up did not like that. And I am disabled, and I definitely don't like being bumped. So I wanted to ask, is it possible to couple without bumping the cars physically?
Yeah, I think that one to Jerry.
Yeah, well, Robin, luckily we're in 2023 now, and there's no reason to have heavy bumps. It can be automated. It is being automated all over the world. It can be done.
Somebody's got their sound on.
Excuse me, somebody, would you please, would you stop the radio or whatever?
Or mute or do something. Yeah, we can't hear.
Can you hear now?
Yeah, go ahead, Jerry.
Okay, so there's been a remarkable amount of advances, as you know, technologically since the 70s. We couple spaceships to spaceships. We do all kinds of things that weren't even dreamed of in those days. This would be smooth. The problem is, as Rick Laubscher said, is getting the scheduling down to like clocks. And you can go places in the world where you do have clock-like schedules. Paris or Switzerland and many places. Tokyo, I see Paul over there, I thought of Tokyo. You got these cars work wonderfully well. Muni has a lot to do to come up to that level, and some of it would cost money. So, but I would say it's not correct to blame the mechanical coupling itself for the issue. It's more to do with the 5 lines and what happens when you're not in the subway. What happens on the way from the beach down the L line into the West Portal. Things happen that nobody predicts. So that has to be put under better control. And I wouldn't say you have to do all the coupling that's talked of. And I agree that now's the time to test it, to get this myth out of everybody's mind that it's the coupling itself. It's not the coupling itself. It's this way the system, the Muni system is set up right now.
Okay. Howard Strasser. Go ahead, Howard. Oh, I'm sorry. I skipped. Excuse me. Howard, you go ahead. And then Mark, you're next. Go ahead, Howard.
Yeah. Okay. So I appreciate all the good information we got from Jerry about the improvement in coupling. I think we now have to make another step in our minds and realize Muni is not a railway. It's a random. And the randomness can serve us very well. We don't know when the M's coming to West Portal Station. We don't know when the K's coming. We don't know when the L's coming. Every now and then, all you have to do is couple 6 trains, 6 times in the whole, any hour, and you probably have enough immense capacity as you need. So you use all your electronics, all your information. Gee, the K is there, hold it up for 1 minute, an M's going to come right behind, kiss it and couple it and let it go. And you won't have to do another coupling at West Portal for maybe 10 minutes. And then maybe a couple of minutes later, an N comes close to a J. Oh, let's do it. And then you only have to couple so few trains an hour. It's not to worry. It can work. First, I agree. First, we have to prove that they really can couple, but we're not worried about a schedule. Just couple whenever it's feasible, a few times an hour, just to see that it works. Later, when we get more ridership and all that, okay, you may have to do a few more, but it's never going to be a big number, and it doesn't have to be precise railway operation. It's random. That's what Muni does best. They recognize random in the buses. The trolleys run on the streets. They're just like buses. They're random. I mean, close, a minute or two, but if you stick to a schedule, suppose an M's early and a K's late, then you can have a 4-minute difference. But if you do it random, they're always within a minute. Well, you only do it when they're within a minute. I hope we can do something like that. Thank you.
I agree with that, Howard, 100%. Take advantage of the opportunities and don't when you don't need to.
Okay, real quick. This is Mark.
Go ahead, Mark.
I just wanted to say to Peter, to Jerry, and to Rick, excellent presentation. I really appreciate all you had to say. So thank you. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you.